Hello and welcome back, or welcome to my channel. For those of you that don't know, my name is Lotte and I'm a first year medical student at the University of Leeds. So in today's video, it's just going to be quite chill and chatty about interviews. So I've had quite a lot of people messaging me, asking me about resources, about when to start prep and all of that fun stuff. So I thought I would just separate this video into 3 sections. So we'll do the before, during and after the interview process. You probably noticed that I have been MIA for a little while, so I have just started medical school. It's been quite hectic, getting used to my schedule and all of that stuff, so I gave myself a little bit of a break from filming videos, as I was also doing BMAT mentoring, so that was taking up a lot of extra time, plus getting used to a very tough degree and keeping myself alive. So now that I feel like I've kind of got the hang of things, I do want to get back into filming again because I really love making videos, and what better place to start than interview prep. I think the biggest questions that are in people's minds around this time is when do you start, where do you start, and what resources do you use? So we'll go through those step by step. So when do you start? Honestly, I would recommend starting now. You do not want to be getting your interview offer a week before your interview and then having to cram everything in that week. And usually the interviews come around the same time, so you're potentially going to be doing a lot one after the other, and you do not want to be cramming all when you've got the stress of actually having to prepare how you're going to say your answers. So I would really recommend that now you just start reading a couple of things, watching some videos. I found it really helpful searching different case studies and hot topics on YouTube, watching some videos and then taking a couple of notes, and then just using things like BBC News, The Guardian, whatever you want to stay on top of medical news. And then just read a few articles here and there, nothing super intense. You just want to have a general knowledge of hot topics, of some ethical things, and of the news today. Obviously focusing on COVID, vaccinations, things that are very in the media a lot and that they can ask you questions about. In terms of resources, I would really recommend the Medic portal for getting questions, and have a flick through some of the questions that may come up, and maybe have a go at one a day, just writing a few bullet points for it. And then for YouTube, if you just search up a case study, you'll find so many amazing different YouTubers. So that's really not difficult to find at all. That's all I really use for my interview prep, to be honest. And then I went through my personal statement, I picked out articles that I'd reference, and I just made sure that I'd printed those out, reread them loads, kind of read around the topics that I'd mentioned to make sure I had a broad enough knowledge of that topic so that if I was asked about it, then I would be able to talk fluently and not freak out and be like, I have no idea what you've just said, even though I referenced it in my personal statement, because I'm sure many of us have been there. Another thing that I would really recommend that you do as well is to separate the questions into different categories, and then when you go through the Medic portal questions, you can kind of put these into your personal different categories, and it will just help you to have a better idea of how you're meant to be answering that question. So I've got mine up here, my interview prep document. So I used OneNote. I had a notebook called interview prep, and then I had a different section in each of those called personal questions, NHS and hot topics, ethical dilemmas, situational judgment, role play, and then I had each of the medical schools that I was doing an interview with in its own section, so I could write about like a couple of things to do with the actual teaching, the course, the style of teaching, and then a couple of things about the city and various different clubs and societies, because that is something that they may want you to mention, because obviously you are trying to sell yourself to the university, and how are you going to be an attribute to that university? Are you going to do a sport? Are you going to do music? Do you know a lot about the history of the university? Are you really interested in the city? That kind of thing. So just to give an example to try and help you understand what I mean by each of those sections, in personal questions, it's your things like why medicine, your biggest strengths and weaknesses, and then NHS and hot topics is things like the obesity crisis, COVID, ageing population, complementary medicine, effects of Brexit, junior doctor, salary, all of those things. Then ethical dilemmas and situational judgment can be a little bit difficult to differentiate between. So usually the ethical dilemmas are where you're going to be bringing in case studies. So these are things like the ethical principles, like the 4 ethical principles: consent, competency, Fraser guidelines, Gaelic competence, Things like euthanasia, Jehovah's Witnesses, abortion, those things are all to do with ethical dilemmas, and that's where you bring in the 4 ethical principles. Whereas situational judgment is a little bit different. I would probably say it's more like situational judgment in UCAT. That's what it's closest to, essentially. So things like a drunk colleague, doctors being on social media, a team member not helping in group projects. That is basically your situation. So you're not really bringing situations into ethical dilemmas, like you don't want those to cross over too much. And then role play is things like communication, history taking, those kind of things. So it's really important that you have these categories so that then when you see a question, you can put it into your category and then you'll have a better understanding of how to answer it. Once you've started doing this and you've collected together your categories and you've put some questions in there, I would really recommend that every day you have a flick through them, you add a couple of bullet points. So when I was doing my prep, I never actually sat down and did hours and hours. I would just add to it when something came into my head of something I'd done, something I'd mentioned on my personal statement, or a scenario I'd been involved in that I thought maybe could be linked to something. Then I would just add it into the document, and it never made it a really stressful process, because that's absolutely what you don't want. You've got to try and enjoy this process because it is actually interesting, the things you'll read. The case studies can be super interesting and helpful to your future career as a doctor and also in medical school. Like already I've done a lot of ethical cases, and so much of the stuff I read in my interview prep is coming up, and it's really helpful that I have these notes already, because now I don't need to worry about making them, which is ideal. As I was saying, once you've got all of this document collated, then it would be a good idea to start asking friends and family to ask you an interview question from your document, or even if somebody offers to do a full interview with you, then you have to take the opportunity, because it will make such a big difference. I'm sure your teachers would be willing to help you out if you ask them. And of course, friends and family, even if they just ask you one question, it can be really helpful, and see if they can give you a little bit of feedback. Skipping forward a couple of weeks, so now imagine it's the day of the interview. The most important thing that you can do is have a relaxing morning routine. You don't want to be feeling stressed. You're going to be having a conversation with someone. Don't get yourself really worked up. This isn't an exam. I would recommend getting up, going for a walk, taking a shower, having some breakfast, and just preparing everything you need for the interview. So the chances are you'll have to do an ID check. Maybe they'll have given you a number that you'll need to mention, like a reference number. You might need to have your personal statement ready. They'll tell you what you need, but just make sure you've got all of those with you, because obviously if you forget those, it's not going to look very good to the interviewer. And then after that, I would have a look through your notes that you've made and a couple of things that you think you might forget, like probably the NHS hot topics and a couple of case studies. Just have a flick through them. But you don't want to be memorizing them, because you do not want to be speaking like a robot. That is absolutely not going to get you anywhere. You need to just be natural. You're having a conversation. You're not being tested, and it's not an essay that you're reciting. You're having a structured conversation. This leads us really nicely into the during the interview process element of this video. So when you're doing the questions, make sure to take a deep breath before you answer the question, and never ever be afraid to ask the interviewer if you can have a minute to think about the question. It looks much more professional and much better if you say, is it okay if I just have a minute to think about the answer? Take your time, and it might feel like 5 years to you, but I promise you it won't even be a minute. You'll probably be sat there for 15 seconds. But the answer you give after giving yourself that time will be 1,000 times better if you just sit and waffle something that comes to the top of your head. So give yourself that time, take a deep breath, and honestly, the most important thing is make sure you're smiling throughout the interview, because people remember body language much more, and there are studies that show that body language is the most important thing in an interview, and it's less about what you actually say, it's the greeting, the goodbye, and your general body language. So look smiley, happy, and just be really friendly, and I'm sure they will love you. Don't sit there sounding like a robot. And another thing that I would highly recommend doing is thanking the interviewers at the end, and just saying thank you for this learning experience and that you've really enjoyed yourself. The number of people that are going to say that will be this big, so if you can say that, then they will definitely remember you. Although I have preached having a conversation, not sounding like a robot, it's super important to remember that your answers do need to be structured in a way. So try and give your point and then try and give an explanation, either by linking it to a case study, something you've read, or context in your own personal life that links in well to it, and then link that back to the question or scenario that they've given you. So you want to kind of have a beginning, so an opening sentence, your context in the middle, and then a concluding sentence linking the initial answer you've given to your context. So after the interview is over and you've thanked them and told them that you've loved the learning experience, then you're probably going to feel very, very overwhelmed and a bit in shock because you've just sat there and spoke. And the chances are within about 20 minutes you will forget a lot of what you said. It'll take a while for it to come back because you're just going to be quite anxious and a lot of adrenaline going, maybe sweaty palms, a little bit shaky. So I would highly recommend that you open up that interview prep document. You open up your section with that interview. So for example, when I did my Leeds interview, I would open up my Leeds section, I would make a new page titled interview, and I would just make a couple of notes on kind of the style of questions they gave me, how I felt I answered them, where I could improve. But make sure you don't share this with anyone because you cannot share interview questions. So don't go into detail about the questions they ask you. You're essentially just giving yourself feedback. So maybe they ask you a personal question, you did this, this and this, but you didn't say this. And if you were asked something like that again, then you would want to say this. And that'll just help you to, basically you're just giving yourself feedback so that on the next interview, if you have another interview, then you can have a look over that and then you can try and incorporate the things you did in your first interview into the next one. I really hope that that was helpful. Please do ask any questions in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them, or you can message me on Instagram. I hope to make a couple of more interview videos, so if you have any suggestions or anything that you would like to see, then please let me know. Thank you so much for watching and have a lovely day.